Hey everyone, it's your friend and colleague Jesse Green here at the Savvy Dentist Podcast. Glad to have your company for another episode of the show. Now, my guest today is someone I've been looking forward to talking to for a long time. Matt Formston is a two-time world champion. He's done it all, seen it all. He's been to the Paralympics. He's represented Australia in multitudes of sports. And what's remarkable and what he's most known for is the fact that he's been able to achieve all of those things with less than 5% vision. Now, of course, every good story has multiple facets to it. And today we're going to explore not just the highs and the achievements that Matt's been able to go and accomplish, but also the journey of getting there in the first place. And we're going to explore all of that and a bit more. So, Matt, welcome to the program. It's great to have you, mate.
Thanks, Jesse. Appreciate it, mate. Thanks for having me.
Mate, I interviewed Lane Beachley on the podcast a little while ago. And when I was talking to her, she said, you really need to have a chat to Matt. He's a really remarkable guy. And so anyway, here we are. And as I said, I'm grateful that you've made the time. I think when I did my research in looking you up and what you've done, there's highlight after highlight after highlight after highlight. And I want to talk on all of those things. But I want to talk a little bit about the early days because you lost your vision at about 5, if I've got my research correct. And you obviously going from having the ability to see to then not having the ability to see. I wanted to ask you what that process was like as a young kid. And I also want to talk a little bit about your mum and dad because they sound really remarkable as well. So can you just walk us through what actually happened, how you went from being able to see to having less than 5% vision?
Yeah, so I had full vision. Well, we believe I had full vision. That's the other part to it. When you speak to a lot of people in the disability space, there's a huge percentage of people that miraculously acquire their disability at the age 5. It's a magic age. Yeah. That's because they go to school and it gets picked up, right? So we think that I had full vision until I was about 5. And most of if you look at all the photos of me, and we're talking, there's not lots of photos because it's early 80s, but I'm looking straight at the camera. And then from about 5 onwards, I'm looking anywhere but the camera. So I got picked up in school, I went to a mainstream school. I got picked up through a routine. Eye nurse came to the school, picked it up, went to the Sydney Eye Hospital, got tested. I had a condition called macular dystrophy, which is a congenital disorder, but no history of it in my family, so they didn't know genetically where it came from. We've recently found out in the last 5 years that it's from my mum, because my mum's acquired macular degeneration in her old age. So that's how I acquired the physical disability. How it was, my experience of it was really interesting, and I think this is probably, I'm a keynote speaker, I speak to a lot of audiences, and most times, everyone wants to come up at the end of it and talk to me about my parents. Not about my achievements, but about how my parents set me up for success. And the nuance is that they were told by the doctors at the Sydney Eye Hospital, this child that you thought you had with perfect vision and perfect life, and I grew up on a waterfront property in Narrabeen. It was a pretty idyllic sort of upbringing back in the 80s. Narrabeen Lake's at my back doorstep, everything's great, full eyesight, and then no, that kid's gone. He'll never really have many friends in life. He won't ever play sport. He won't really get a job. He'll basically sit around, listen to music, teach him how to play guitar, because that's sort of what he's going to do now. And the interesting thing that they did was they didn't tell me any of that. So they came home. Dad was a senior sales and marketing exec. He went to a sponsorship meeting at the Cronulla Sharks that afternoon with the board to sign a massive sponsorship deal. And he stood up and walked out of the meeting because he was so disillusioned by the whole thing. And I'm writing a book at the moment, so there's all this is sort of fresh in my head. But he came home and they just said, yep, you've been to the doctors today. It's all good. Things are going to be a bit different. We're going to have to do different ways of problem solving, but nothing's different to the way it was yesterday. It's the same life. We just might have to do things a bit differently. And that was all I got told. I didn't get told, hey, doom and gloom, you're blind now, the world's over. And then that narrative went through my whole life. So my dad was having a beer with a few mates. They said, does Matt, talking about under 5s, rugby league, does Matt have any mates that want to play in the team? We haven't got enough players in the team, Narrabeen Sharks. And Dad said, well, Matt will play. And so those two men, instead of saying, oh, you're an amazing dad because you're letting your child with a disability get in harm's way and try and let him fail and do everything else that normal children do, the way they reacted was, oh, Don, your son, Matt's going blind, he can't play. And they made him out to be a bad parent. And then throughout my whole footy journey, there'd be mums making comments in the background that my mum could hear that she was a bad parent because she was letting her child be in harm's way. And so anyway, that's sort of the narrative. So they were always made out to be these bad parents because they were putting me in harm's way. Dad taught me how to use drop saws by feel, and they just taught me to be independent. Like you can't, there's no excuses. And the other part of it was like, I think there's this whole thing around pushy parents these days, right? Parents saying, you're the best little Timmy, you're always going to be the best and that you can't do wrong, or you need to go and do this, you need to play A-grade soccer. There was none of that ever in my life. It was always, if you're choosing to do it properly. There's standards, and we're not going to let your standards slip because you're blind, and you're never going to make excuses. So you're going to do things differently. but you're going to try your hardest. And if you try your hardest, everything's cool. My dad's a very hard man. And so it was never never mollycoddling or too much encouragement. It was more like, just, you've chosen to do this, so do it properly. And those standards were taken through my whole life.
Yeah, so I really like that. That's the ultimate of self-responsibility, right? And I mean, we could go down a whole rabbit hole around self-responsibility. And I grew up in the 80s as well, mate. Favorite decade of all time. And
it was the best.
It was unreal, not to mention the music, but that's a whole conversation. But in any event, the point being is, you fall off, skin your knee, skin your elbow, whatever, come on, get back up, off you go. There's none of this, oh my God, there's no histrionics around any of that sort of stuff. It was just kind of get up and get going. Yep. I want to ask you a bit about your school days though, mate, because kids can be little buggers. Tell me a bit about that. What were the kids like at school?
So it's funny, the kids in school that were my mates and my footy mates, like I played first 15 for my school and they were all fine. It was more like the kids that, and I don't like using this term, but there was more like the nerdy kids that had issues thought they could bully me. So my mates would never try and bully me, the guys that were like the jocks or the fit guys, because they knew that I was physically capable and I wouldn't tolerate it. So I'd have this contrast of being respected by the fittest kids and the most respected kids in my class, but then also being disrespected and attemptedly bullied by other kids, which emotionally was really challenging to understand why that was happening. The things they'd sort of do is, how many fingers am I holding up? And they'd stand just far enough away that I couldn't see it, or they'd change their voice. So they'd mimic another voice, so I wouldn't know which person it was, so I couldn't get them back. And I ended up using a laptop. In the 80s and 90s, kids didn't have laptops in class, but I got given a laptop because I could touch type and I could write notes. And then I could refer back to that later sometimes. But, even though just the process of taking notes in itself is a great way to take memory. But kids would walk up behind me and they'd highlight, while I wasn't talking to someone else, they'd highlight all my text and delete all my work.
Really?
There's so many things. And then because I could play footy, I had a history teacher bring my parents in for a meeting. And I chose to do ancient history, which wasn't the smartest thing because I'm a kid that can't read. I never chose to read Braille. So my whole education was listening and asking questions, and essentially became a 20-year degree in sales for me. That was sort of where I spent most of my career, because I was just listening, asking questions and listening again. But yeah, this history teacher asked my parents to come in and announce to them that I'd conned everybody and that I'd been conning the world since I was 5 and I wasn't actually blind and I could see.
What?
So there's all these contrasts of being picked on because I was different and then being told I wasn't different. And I get on a bus, and this is in my movie, if you've seen my movie, The Blind Sea, with my skateboard, because I could ride my skateboard and I'd memorise things. Then I'd jump on the bus and the bus driver would say, no, and I'd pull out my visually impaired person's permit, which is like a blind free transport card. And because I'd ridden a skateboard and holding my skateboard, the bus driver would say, no, you've stolen that off someone else, and they'd kick me off the bus. And then I'd have to get another bus, which wasn't with my mates. And then, yeah, just the whole world was pretty hard, mate. So
yeah. So how do you respond to that? I mean, we spoke a little bit off air. We spoke a little bit about fight and flight. How'd you go with that?
Yeah, look, I'm not a flight person, and these days I can choose to, but back in those days I couldn't. And as a kid, you just react to things, right? And you can either react in different ways, but I had to react, because if you back down to the bullies, they just keep doing it and it gets more and more fun. So I learned that if I escalated very quickly on top of what they did, they would not come back again for a second go. So I got really good at hurting people, and that was the way I saw that you got outcomes. So I learned, my lived experience was, if someone attacks you, you attack them back more, and then they will back down, and that resolves the problem. But because I did that so much through school, I just learned that I had to learn behaviour. Once I left school and I was an adult trying to migrate into the world, I carried that behaviour with me, and basically I had this toxic 10-year period of my life where I thought that was the way I had to resolve things, by having to have arguments and punch on with people. And if anyone even started anything physical with me, I would go next level.
Yeah, wow. Okay, so from 0 to 100, kind of straight up.
Yeah, 300. Yeah.
Okay. So obviously you've moderated and changed that behaviour now. What was the catalyst for that change?
Yeah, it's funny. I get asked, because everyone wants that moment, right? Well, you had this epiphany moment where things just changed for you. And I don't think there really was an epiphany moment. There was a few. Look, I'm writing a book at the moment, and so I haven't really told this story much, but I'm starting to share it. But there was a couple of times where, I woke up at 2 a.m. at a bus stop. When I say woke up, I became conscious. I drank so much alcohol that I somehow got to sitting at this bus stop. I got blood all over me, and it's not my blood. I'm okay. So I've obviously got in a fight with someone, and I've hurt them really badly, but I don't even know who that person is. And there's moments like that where you just wake up the next day and you're like, is this the best version of me? And probably, it was sad that was who I'd become, because I was as a teenager, I was this kid that was playing rep footy, rep ice hockey. I was a good student. I was a good kid. I just lost my way. So there was a number of little moments like that. But I think the main catalyst, really, when I think about it, is I really wanted to. I grew up in a really loving, healthy family, and I wanted to have that for myself. And I just wasn't finding success in relationships. I was probably picking the wrong women, and then when I did have arguments with them, it would escalate to the tit for tat sort of thing verbally. And so at the end of the day, I think it come back down to that. Like I wanted to have a good relationship, and when I started looking at what I wanted from a partner, I didn't actually have all those things. If I had a list of things that I wanted from them, I wasn't ticking those things off myself. So how could I expect someone else to bring those things into a relationship that if I wasn't bringing them in? So yeah, I chose to just start working on myself to be the best version of me, so that I could, I suppose, find a life partner, that I could get married, have kids, and have that part of my life that I was sort of really seeking.
Yeah. And so in amongst all this, obviously, again, Matt, you're known for your surfing, your sporting accomplishments, but you've also had a really successful business career. You've been an executive at Optus. You've sat on different boards and high-level positions. Where were you career-wise, sports-wise, during this period of turmoil? Where were you up to in that part of your life?
So sports-wise, I'd stopped playing footy and ice hockey. I got glandular fever when I was 16, and that pretty much terminated all my football and so my sporting career. So I wouldn't play para sport because I didn't acknowledge that I had disability growing up, because I was embarrassed about it. And so I lost all my sport, and my whole identity was sort of linked to sport, and that's where I got treated well. The boys never said to me, picked on me, like the opposition would never do anything. Like they started kicking the ball to me on the kickoff, obviously, because if you find out that there's a kid on the other team with a bad knee, you're definitely going to run at that knee, you know what I mean? Whereas if there's a blind kid on the other team, you can kick him the ball every time once you start getting competitive. So that happened, but I thought that was fine because that's competitive, but it was the bullying at school that was hard. So there's this contrast to bullying at school but then being respected in the footy field. But I lost sport completely. I had a good job, so I was working as a sales manager, ended up going through my career. I was doing okay, but it was sort of stagnant. It wasn't really much going on. So this period from 2008 to 2010, I just looked at myself every day. I was really accountable for, like, what time are you getting up? What are you doing? Because up until that point in time, I was being successful, but I was being reactive. There was no strategy involved. I wasn't doing the extras. And that's what I think when I go back to my footy career, my ice hockey career when I was younger, I was getting up and doing a little triathlon in the morning. Because I knew I had to be the fittest, strongest kid on the field because I was legally blind. So I was going to make errors. I was going to be slower. My judgment was going to be off compared to the other boys. So I needed to be fitter, faster and stronger than them. So I had to do extra work. And looking back at that, I was like, well, I'm not doing the extra work in my career. I'm not doing the extra work in my relationships. If I do some extras, it's going to make things better. So through that 2-year period, I started doing the extras around work, around my behaviours, around how I interacted with my friends, family, everything. So 2008, 2010, and then miraculously in 2010, I got my first executive job and I got signed to ride for Australia. So my first Paralympic position. I bought my first $1 million property. There's all these things, all in 1 year. I met my wife. I'd had really failed relationships, picking the wrong women, but also not being the best version of me with those women. And then met my wife in 2010. So all these things happened in 1 year because I'd done that 2 years of really hard work, which was really, really hard. Like, it was to be accountable to yourself every day and to not to beat yourself up, but to say you could have done that better and then to change it and be accountable for that the next time you have that interaction. That's really, really hard work. But I did that work, and so there was like that 1 year pivot year, 2010. And since then, every year I've been selected for an Australian team in some sport. I basically won a world title or set a world record, and my career's just been exponential because I set myself up.
Yeah, so obviously 2010 is a great year for you. Life went really in a different trajectory.
Well, I mean, there's been other better years since then, right? But that was definitely the pivotal one.
Yeah, it's a big one. Can I linger on the work for a second? Because here's something I'm going to share a personal belief, and you're totally welcome to disagree with me, and that's okay. But one of the things I've noticed, and we're going back to the 80s childhood thing a little bit here as well, so I'm probably sounding like a crusty old fart, but one of the things I've noticed is when it comes to success and achievement and all those sorts of things, there seems to be a prevailing culture at the present time where I want it, but I don't really want to do what's required to achieve it. And I'm a really big believer in hard work. I've worked pretty hard in my life, and I quite enjoy hard work. But I wanted to ask you about where hard work has fit into this, because that 2008 to 2010 period, as you said, it was not easy. And so I want to just explore what that hard work looked like. And I want to get a sense of how hard.
Well, I completely agree with you. I think standards is a big thing. Well, I think there's two parts to what you just said. There's the standards and then there's the hard work, right? So the hard work, you got to do the hard work, but it's about the quality of the work as well. Because you can do lots of work, but if it's not good quality work, it probably won't give you the same outcomes. So it's about assessing the work you're doing, but then you've got to keep doing, you've got to keep working, like always. Yeah, like for me, it was just every day, like, what am I doing? Getting out of bed, like how accountable. People say to me, oh, I'm too busy. I've got this dream to do this, but I'm too busy. Sorry. I've got 3 kids, a wife. I've got about 7 jobs. I'm chasing my next world title in a new sport. I'm writing a book. I'm starting a new movie. And I'm doing all these things at a very high level and I'm accountable for all of them and I'm managing teams in those areas. So if you're telling me you're too busy to do things, I'm sorry, but you're not. It's just the reality. It's about being smart with your time and being accountable. That's the most thing. Most of us aren't accountable for our time. When you say you're too busy, that means you're not managed enough. You're not accountable enough for your time. Like, what time do you go to bed every night? And if you don't have an answer for that, then you're not managing your time. You're not being accountable. Because I certainly know when I go to bed every night, there's a time that I make sure I'm in bed so I can get up in time in the morning. I get most of my good work done early in the morning.
Yep.
And that's me, right? That doesn't mean everyone else has to have that pattern. We can all do things in different ways. But the hard work is around everything. It starts with time. It starts with being accountable for time. It starts being accountable for how you let people treat your time. Like you don't accept meetings with people that aren't going to create value for you. And them, like it's a two-way street. And then it's just, well, those words, I fix that on words. Like I said a sentence, I'm in a board meeting, right? I don't say a lot. I used to say a lot when I was younger. I don't tend to say a lot these days in board meetings. I sit back and then lean in when I think it's really important. But then when I lean in, later that day, I'll be in the car with my driver. Obviously, I can't drive. I'm thinking about the words I used, and like in a way, it'll be a couple of sentences, and I'm like, well, hang on. What if I supplemented that word instead of this word? What different outcome could that have provoked in that room? They're the sort of things that are hard work, right? It's always on. The more that you can't just do something and then move on to something else. You got to assess what you did and could you have done it a bit better? And it's not about being negative and beating yourself up, because if you do that, you just won't create outcomes, right? It's about just being accountable, making decisions, and then acting.
Yeah, I love that. Another topic that we could explore at length is the importance of words. It's another favourite topic of mine. I think that people use their words a bit too freely and willy-nilly and without intention.
Yes.
And so we get unintended consequences around that. But, I'll come back to that if we get time. But I want to move on to your sporting career for a second, and we'll talk about your corporate career as well. Bike riding. Tell me a bit about how you got into that. Now, you went to the Paralympics with that. And again, I read somewhere that you've got pretty strong power through your legs, and maybe that's useful in surfing. I'm not a surfer, so I can't speak to that. Maybe that's useful in both those sports. Is there a crossover? Is there not a crossover? Why cycling? What was it about cycling? And then what was the experience going to the Para Games like?
Yeah. So I'm going to jump, just something you said then triggered something. So I'm going to say that, then I'll come back to your question. Because people say, oh, I'm not the right body shape for a sport. Oh, that's not, again, coming back to excuses and this. I think we've got into this excuse culture where, that's not me. I don't fit into that, so I can't. So as a footy player, at the end of my footy career, I was 94 kilos.
Yeah.
So I'm about 90 right now, right? So I was bigger arms, big shoulders, big back. Now I'm just solid all over sort of thing. But my legs are bigger from cycling, but I was just big upper body, right? So then when I started cycling, my coach said, mate, you needed, like, the great arms, that's awesome, but they're not useful to us at all as a cyclist. All you're doing is dragging around extra weight that we don't need. Yeah. So I dropped from 94 kilos when I first started riding in 2010 for Australia.
Yep.
I dropped when I won my first World Cup in Canada in 2013. I was 73 kilos.
Holy moly.
No, I didn't. There wasn't much fat involved in that loss. I just shredded muscle. I just got rid of muscle I didn't need. And then, you talk about powerful legs. So at 73 kilos, I was leg pressing 440 kilos.
Jeez Louise.
And as a because people say as well, para athletes, isn't that lovely? They let those people with disabilities play some games. That's nice. As a para athlete, I had the 3rd highest 4-minute power profile at the Institute of Sport, New South Wales Institute of Sport. Able-bodied.
Able-bodied, yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I got really fit, but that was work again, right? I was on the bike every morning, 6 days a week on the bike at 4:25. So I get up at 4:15, on the bike by 4:25, do about 100 Ks most mornings.
Yep.
And then getting closer to races, we'd do less Ks, but more weights to sharpen the blade to get more speed. But I'd be doing, talk about time, I was doing 100 Ks in the morning, get off the bike, have a quick protein shake, hardly ever eating, because that's what I needed to shred to get down from 94 kilos of muscle to get my body to eat itself. I just had to basically not eat.
Yeah.
So I'd have enough protein to recover, but no calories at all. I'd go to work, do some, I was running a sales team at the time, do some work, meet customers, lunchtime, jump in the gym for an hour and a bit, do some weights, do extra work, come home, do a 45-minute quick session on the ergo, on the stationary bike, and then spend some time with my wife. This is pre-kids, and then when we had our first couple of kids before I retired out of my cycling career. But managing all those different hats, I don't want to do them all well. So if I let them blend into each other, I'm not going to do them well. So I just wear each hat at a time. Being a husband, being a business person, and being an athlete, I'm not thinking about those other things at the time because that won't let me be successful in that one area.
That's a skill, Matt. That's a skill to be really present in that moment with what you're doing, whether it's cycling, whether it's being husband, whether it's being sales manager, whatever it is. I wanted to ask you, is that something that comes innately to you, or did you have to train yourself to be so present in those particular disciplines?
I think the present part is something that comes, I think it actually comes as a benefit of my disability. That's something I love talking about is, and obviously I do a lot of work in advocacy around disability space, and I hold some senior positions in that space these days. But I think a lot of the times people want to say to this inclusion movement that we've got, I think we're seeing a bit of a change in that recently, but I'm not a fan of the word inclusion. I think, I sit on boards for diversity and inclusion, but I just wish we'd get rid of the inclusion word. Diversity is really important. Having a good gender mix in your business is super important. Having people with disabilities in your business is important, but you've got to find the value from that. Like, why does your gender bring value? And people could say because you've got different approaches or whatever, because of whether we're male or female. People with disabilities acquire different skills because of their disability. So for me, I'm blind. I've never really read much, so I'm good at talking and listening, articulating things, using words. I've got a really good memory, so I can memorize things. I'm obviously a good problem solver because every day I've got to problem solve just getting on a bus or doing anything because everything's hard. So I've developed all these skills, right? So these attributes because of my disability. So I think it's important that the people that have a disability or have any type of difference are able to articulate why their disability or their difference creates value. And it's not about inclusion, it's about using diversity as a tool or as an asset in a business. Yeah, that's something I'm passionate about. So the skill, I think I was really bad at time management when I was younger, really bad, like late all the time, not accountable for my time. When I was playing footy, I was always early to footy training, but then I lost that in that lost period, that 10-year period where I was lost. But I think in that 2-year period, I built that because I realized that when you're late and you're not accountable and you're not present, you're not performing right. And then you're creating rework as well. And if you're creating rework, you're having to do things twice, then you're not being efficient.
Rework is the most expensive work, mate.
Yeah. I had to build it basically. So it's a learned skill. It's not something I was born with, but it's once again just being accountable. And when you're really accountable for your time and your effort, you won't be late. You'll be hyper-focused on what you're doing. You won't think about other things.
So accountability is a real theme that's coming through the conversation. And obviously, thus far, we've spoken about self-accountability. How have you transferred that into your corporate life? And you've led other people, you've had teams to take charge of. How do you instill a culture of accountability? You obviously lead from the front, you've got it yourself, but how do you encourage others to be as accountable as you?
That's really hard. I think leading from the front is a good way to do that, to show people that you are going to be accountable. I think when there's a behaviour of accountability from leadership, that will filter through the business. When leadership don't take accountability with communications and you're saying, this happened, but don't look here, look over here, that type of behaviour, that's not going to help your team become hyper accountable. So if you, as a leader, if something breaks in the business, say, well, I'm responsible for this. We're all responsible, but I'm the leader of this, so I'm the most responsible. So what I'm going to do is X, Y, Z, and I need you to help me with this. So it's leading with that accountability, but it's also asking people when they're showing that they're not being accountable. It normally comes through in words, and we're coming back to words again, but the lack of accountability often comes through in words and people start using excuse behaviour and excuse words. So I let people talk and then I bring them back to a certain part of what they're saying and saying, well, hang on, sorry, I don't understand that piece. What about you what about you being accountable is those words? Because that sounds like you're trying to distract me from what you're saying and I'm not going to be distracted. I want you to drill into this piece that we didn't get right. How are you accountable for that? When you make people accountable for their words, they realise then the next time they're not going to come back and do that again. They're going to go, okay, this bloke's not going to be distracted. I need to actually have answers for him. So I'm going to get it right.
Perfect. Okay. Awesome. So I do want to talk about your surfing, mate, because obviously it's something that you're really known for. You've got your documentary, The Blind Sea, and I read through your material on your website, and obviously you started bodyboarding, I think, around 5 or 6 or thereabouts, and you've got an older brother who helped you. I wanted to talk about overcoming fear for a second, because really candidly, I think we all experience fear to some degree or another. And getting on a surfboard with a limited vision would be something for many of us would think is a fearful experience. Now, obviously not for you. I've heard you talk about process a few times as well, and I wanted to ask you a little bit about the role that process has in dealing with any fearful situations. And firstly, do you feel any fear? I imagine you do because you're human, but what's your process for getting through that and coming out the other side?
Okay, so there's about 3 hours worth of a podcast in those questions you just asked.
All right, good. 3 episodes.
Let me talk to the fear piece first. I don't actually feel fear the way other people do, I don't believe. So I was so fearful when I was a teenager that people would see me as being blind. My biggest fear was being seen as being different, because seeing as that disabled kid. So I would tackle anyone, fight anyone, do anything, because in my adolescent crazy male head, I believed that if I could physically beat you, that showed that I wasn't disabled.
Right.
Because of that process in my head and that years and years and years of that, I was more fearful of you or other people around seeing me as weak because of my disability than I was of dying.
Wow. Okay. That's hardcore.
That's the reality of it.
Yeah. Okay.
And because I've been asked this question so many times now, I've actually been dug into it and in my own psyche and realised that that's what happened. And it's not just about being hurt. I would be more comfortable dying, fighting you or anyone or tackling anyone than being seen as being weak because of my disability. So that happened for a long time. And then I realised I don't need to prove that, at the end of that, when I studied all the self-work, it's like, actually, that's not about me, that's about other people.
Yeah.
So I got through all that. But because of that background, I'd hurt myself so many times. And then I realised, you know what? Physical pain and physical injury is just data. Because I know, I've pretty much broken every bone in my body and I've got stitches everywhere. I can turn pain off. Like, and that's what I did as a cyclist, right? It's just data. So I know pain is just my nervous system telling my brain that something's happened.
Yeah.
And I can consciously and people can say that, but I can actually consciously do that. You could hit me with a baseball bat, wouldn't love it, but I could process it. It'd be okay. So I've got that part of fear for me, the physical fear for me, and so I've done all these things where I didn't really have fear. But now I have children.
Yeah, okay.
That's brought in fear for me. So when I was laying out the back of Nazare, which we haven't talked about yet, but it's the biggest wave in the world. I set a Guinness World Record there. I was laying out the back there, and the media, when I went to surf there, I didn't want to talk about it because as an Aussie bloke, you don't want to talk about stuff, you just want to do it, right? And then maybe talk about it afterwards over a beer, but you don't really want to go on about it. But we were making a movie. The director was paying the bill for me to go there, so he wanted to obviously make publicity for his movie. So Dan, the director, was like, mate, we were going to the media. So we went to the media. The narrative of the media was much like the narrative from those two guys having a beer with my dad when I started playing footy, that he can't. They're going to kill the blind guy. So this is global media, right? It's like they're not talking about local ABC. This is like CNN, ESPN, everyone. So I'd heard a bit of this. I tried to not listen to it. And when I say heard, I can read text. I've got voiceover, so my devices talk to me. If I touch the screen, it'll read things out to me. So I'd read a few little things. I stopped reading it because I didn't want to know about it, but you end up hearing this stuff, right? So I'm laying out the back before I caught my first wave there, and I'm like, maybe they're right. Maybe we're not. Like I won the Heavy Water Award in 2023, the best big wave surfer in Australia. So, and me and my team, I was there with Lucas Chambo, who's one of the best big wave surfers in the world, Dylan Longbottom. Me and my team are the best big wave surfers in the world, right? We know. But when you start hearing things so many times, you think maybe they're right, maybe we don't know. And so that doubt started creeping into my head. And then I actually felt fear the way I think other people do for the first time, this feeling in my stomach. But fear for me normally is just information, it's just data where I say I'm going to make a decision and I'm okay with pain, fear, whatever. This thing was more like it was almost crippling because I was like, well, hang on, if I get this wrong and I die, so this is the nuance. I was comfortable with me dying, but I had fear of my children losing their father.
Yep, I understand that.
So yeah, sorry, that's a long answer to your question, but that's my relationship with fear.
No, it's a really interesting and it's a really nuanced take on it as well. And I think as a parent, you're right. You experience fear in different ways once you have kids, and that's obviously something you've encountered. And I wanted to talk about Nazare because that's obviously a huge part of the story. For those that don't know, tell us a bit about Nazare. It is the largest wave in the world. It's regarded as a brute of a thing to get on and ride. Tell us a bit about Nazare. Again, what was the origin of thinking that's a good thing to do?
So Nazare is the biggest wave in the world. It's where all the Guinness World Records are set for biggest waves. It's in Portugal. It's pronounced Nazare. Every Aussie wants to call it Nazar because we all want to make it sound European, but it's just Nazare. So actually, it's funny because the beginning of the documentary, Dan, the director, had said to me, Matty, because the movie was always going to be about me surfing big waves. I've always liked big waves. But he said, what's the final piece? Where are the waves? Because they needed to start obviously looking at resources, like how do we get cameras to these places? How do we do safety? What's the reality of resources? All this sort of stuff. So they needed to start doing the production work behind the location of where I would surf this big wave. So he's tell me the waves that you were thinking about surfing. And I said, well, I'm pretty much open to anything, any wave in the world except Nazare. That's literally what I said to him.
Yeah.
And then 18 months later, because it took us about 3 years to make the film, 18 months later, it became like Dylan Longbourn, and Dill called me and he's like, Matty, I think Nazare is the wave. And it just ended up being, it was the sort of a why not moment. That's the sort of thing that I've come to in my head is like this, people always say to me, why would you do that? Why did you race bikes at over 100 kilometres an hour? Why would you, and in my head, because I brought up Narrabeen, I'm a blue collar town, I just think, why the fuck not? That's where it became this like, why wouldn't we do Nazare? So then we just started planning for it and building the processes. You picked up that I use the word process a lot, but that's what we had to do. Like for me, using a drop saw, I'm not able to see the blade, I'm not able to see the measurement, so I put my hand next to the blade and drop my finger down next to the blade. But I use a process where I know my hand never goes near the trigger until I'm ready to do the cut, and then I use my measuring hand where I put the finger next to the blade is my cutting hand, so that I never use them in the same place, so I can cut a piece of wood, right? And it's a very simple example, but it's obviously a very vivid visual example for people. But if I build the right process, it removes the risk.
Yeah.
So for us, it was about building really clear processes around how we were going to surf Nazare, what we could do, what we couldn't do, what were yes and no moments. And one of the key things we did, and we come back to communication and words, I surfed a pretty scary wave in Australia, and when I'd first started on my toes, because obviously that waves are that big. So the wave in Nazare I ended up surfing was a bit over a 5-story. If you think about a 5-story building, if you're driving around in your car, it's bigger than a 5-story building. So it's a big wave, right? But surfing in Australia, the guys towed me into this really scary spot, and we just used words at that time. So they were like, go, 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 and I let go of the rope and pulled into this wave, and it just mutated and what we call it closed out and just wiped me out basically. And it's right against the cliff, and it dragged me up onto the rocks basically. So I got out of there, I ended up getting out of there, a few bruises and whatever, no problems. Got out the back, and I said to the boys, like, what was that? What the fuck was that? And they were saying the same thing to me, like, why did you catch that wave? What's wrong with you? And so we had this communication breakdown, and I was like, what happened? And they're like, we said no, no, no. And I was like, he said go, go, go. So life or death moments where you're surfing 5-story building waves, you don't.
Yeah, you don't want to leave that to chance.
No. So we used a whistle, and basically binary, so an orienteering whistle. So when my tow driver only, no one else was allowed to use a whistle when we were towing, and my tow driver was the only one. And then they used whistle in recovery. We had different things we used the whistles for, but when we were actually doing the surfing, only my driver could use a whistle. And when he knew I was 100% in the right spot, he'd blow the whistle, and I had to just trust him because I can't see the wave, right? I can't see how big it is or where I am on the wave. I just had to trust that he'd put me in the right spot and just pull and drop down the wave.
Yeah, wow. So I'm curious because this is a business podcast, and obviously that's an amazing story. How has that communication piece, the confusion or having the whistle or the binary communication, how has that come back to your role, boards, leading teams, all the rest of it? Because there's so many lessons out of that, the process, the trust, the team, who's on the team, the communication with them. There's so many things in there.
Yeah, you're right. There's too much. I think what it comes back to is one word you just use, and is trust. That's the one thing I've learned from that. I've always known about it, but the one thing that I learned is about trust. And I sort of, in my coaching business now, in my speaking business, I sort of feel like that's my main product that I sell is trust, and how to build trust, how to use trust. In every transaction we have in business has an element of trust to it. You'll either build trust or you'll lose it. There's no such thing as neutral trust. Because if you do the same thing again, you're still building trust. And that's what it comes back to. The words you use, the transactions, how you deliver, how you turn up, your appearance, it all either builds trust or erodes trust. And so it all comes back to trust. And whether your clients trust you, your customer base trusts you, whether your team trusts you, if you've got the right strategy and you're communicating well to your team, they'll trust you to do the work. But the really key thing, this comes back to my self-work from 2008 to 2010, the other part of trust is trusting yourself. So I love leading my teams now and working one-on-one with people that I'm working with around building their own self-trust, because a lot of us don't have that, right? We don't, obviously I've got a significant amount of self-trust because I've built that over time, but it's also asking that why not question to yourself. If you're going to do something and you're hesitating from doing it, So start asking, start digging into that. Like, why am I scared of doing this? Like, well, why am I backing off from this? I've got my education, I've got my life experience, I've got my business experience, I've got the team behind me, I've got all these things, but I'm still questioning it. Why is that? And it might just come back to that you're not trusting yourself. So be confident in making mistakes, because the more we make mistakes, and if we do it right with our team, we communicate well with each other, we learn and then we get better. You can still build trust whilst making mistakes.
Yeah, 100%. There's so many valuable lessons there, Matt. Yeah, I could talk for days on all of that with you. Hey, Matt, I want to take a moment just to express my gratitude for spending some time with us and sharing not just the lessons, but the stories and the insights and the personal journey that you've been through to get where you are. You've obviously had a wonderful career in the boardroom, on the sporting field, so to speak, because whether it's surfing or cycling or all the other sports in between. Are there any final things you want to leave the audience with, mate, just as things to consider or thoughts to ponder as they go about their own business journey?
I think accountability and trust are the two things that it's remiss of me to say anything else, really. And don't set limits for yourself. We haven't talked about this, but I've just started a journey in freediving. I'm planning to set a world record for freediving in Greece next September. I'm making a new movie about that. And I'm having to rebuild my body again for a different sport and my psychology. And at the moment, my breath hold is, I can hold my breath for over 6 minutes, but that's not a limitation for my depth. The limitation at the moment is this little bit of skin at the back of my throat that won't let me transfer some air around to equalise beyond, like I'm at 106 feet at the moment. And I'm redefining myself. And if I just pigeonhole myself as a surfer or a cyclist or a businessman and said, I can't, or that's too hard, or someone else has done it, I'd never get there. What I've looked at now in this, what I've done with all my sporting careers is, who's the best in the world at this? What processes, procedures are they using? Let me use those now, and then let me tweak them to be better. Just don't set yourself glass ceilings. Like, every one of us is, I'm a blind kid that was told that nothing would ever happen in my life. And I'm an Order of Australia medalist. I've got all these things. But it's just about being self-accountable and trying and having huge, crazy goals, and then just doing the work. Just work hard every day.
Man, I'm a fan of that. Again, Matt, I wanted to just say thanks on behalf of all the listeners here today. You've been an absolute delight to have on the show, and I hope we get to come back and get into those other 3 hours of stuff we mentioned a bit earlier. So we'll see if we can get round 2 and 3 going as well. But for now, mate, I appreciate your time.
Amazing. Thanks, Jesse.
Hey everyone, it's Jesse here. I hope you enjoyed that episode of the podcast. If you're looking for some more tools, some more insights, some more inspiration to help you create a practice that you love, as well as a life that you love, well, head across to savvydentist.com and check out all the goodies that we have there waiting for you right now.